the water comes down, then we might have a cold snap and it freezes, and the water within the pothole will then expand and make the pothole bigger. Then we might have a mild spell, and then that process repeats. So, we do actually need extra funding to acknowledge the fact that, we just live in a climate where we're sort of particularly vulnerable to potholes.
Why? I mean, the fact that this happens, these weather conditions happen, is no great surprise to anybody. Why has the problem been ignored for so long?
I think what's happened is we've had short-term funding. So it's like, oh, there's a pothole, let's patch it up. Oh, there's another one, let's patch it up. But the patches aren't actually really that strong. So then they break down again. So, really what we need is to have roads completely resurfaced, and then they'll just be pothole-free for a very long time. And that really is how funding should be. That's the direction funding should go in, as opposed to just sort of dribs and drabs here and there.
Do you think this government are going to be good for the motorist, or is there indeed a war on the motorist still?
The different parties come in and they've all got different policies that they wheel out, then they cancel the policies, and then there's so much lack of transparency. Like, for example, with the pothole issue, sometimes the government, whichever government is in office, will do some big showboating about how they're going to give X amount of potholes, and you still think that sounds really good.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation. Tonight, the Labour Party has well and truly crashed the economy as revised GDP figures have revealed the economy is on the brink of recession, with GDP per capita declining. Will Red Rachel survive? We'll be getting to all the details of how Labour destroyed the UK's chances of prosperity, in spite of all its promises to fund its projects through economic growth. Meanwhile, the Magdeburg Christmas market terror attack has sparked an Alternative for Deutschland rally, with tensions resting on a knife's edge. Plus, the woke have found their latest victim, one of the most successful authors of all time, Charles Dickens. The theatre has slapped a trigger warning on a new play adaptation of Nicholas Nickleby. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by a most civilised panel, former Attorney-General Michael Ellis and the former Labour MP Lloyd Russell-Moyle. As ever, I want to know your views. It's a crucial part of the programme, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now, it's your favourite time of the day, the News Bulletin with Sophia Wensler.
Jacob, thank you. Good evening. It's just gone 8 o'clock. These are your headlines from the GB Newsroom. The UK economy flatlined in the third quarter of the year, with revised figures showing no growth in GDP between July and September. The Office for National Statistics partly blamed weaker trading in bars and restaurants, while businesses warned the country is headed for the worst of all worlds amid fears of reduced output and hiring. Chancellor Rachel Reeves says the economic challenges are huge, but vows her budget will deliver long-term growth. Sir Keir Starmer is heading abroad again over the new year after drawing criticism about his frequent overseas trips to various summits. The Prime Minister is enjoying his first Christmas in the role, and according to Number 10, he will spend time with his family over the coming days. However, instead of doing so at Downing Street or their family home, the Starmers will head to the grace and favour country residence of Chequers in Buckinghamshire. After spending Christmas Day there, the Prime Minister and his family are going to head overseas. Germany's right-wing Alternative for Deutschland party has held a rally in front of Magdeburg Cathedral near the scene of the Christmas market attack that killed 5 people and injured over 200. The party leader called for a time of reckoning. Police have arrested a 50-year-old Saudi doctor identified by local media as Taleb A, who had lived in Germany since 2006. AfD is the second strongest party at present, polling at about 18 to 20% of the vote, or 10 to 15 points behind the centre-right Christian Democratic Union and its Bavarian sister party. Now, a rioter who went viral after being hit in the head and groin by flying bricks was today jailed for 2.5 years. 40-year-old Brian Spencer reportedly drank 10 pints and a litre of rum before taunting police during violence which erupted in the wake of the Southport stabbings. He was twice struck in the face and head in front of officers before turning around and being hit for a third time in the crotch. And King Charles will deliver this year's Christmas message from the Fitzrovia Chapel, a former hospital chapel in central London. It's the first time in over a decade the speech isn't recorded at a royal residence, with the King choosing the location to highlight healthcare workers and foster unity between faiths. The ornate 19th century chapel was once part of the Middlesex Hospital and now hosts exhibitions and community events. This year's message comes as the King continues treatment following a cancer diagnosis earlier in 2023. The speech will air on Christmas Day at 3 p.m, and you can watch it here on GB News on TV and radio. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Jacob.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. How many times during and since the election campaign did you hear Labour claim it would pay for its ambitious plan for the UK by growing the economy?
None of the plans today in our manifesto for growth, for wealth creation, require us to raise other taxes.
We will reform the National Planning Policy Framework, consulting on a new growth-focused approach to the planning system.
Our focus is on growth. That's been the missing ingredient for the last 14 years. It's been slightly the missing ingredient in this campaign as well, because...
Is why growing our economy is absolutely essential.
Not only did this prove to be untrue when they raised taxes by a record £40 billion during the budget, including an explicit tax on working people via the increase to employers' national insurance, but today's GDP figures prove Labour doesn't have the slightest clue about growth. Labour has exhausted its inheritance card. At every turn, it has blamed the Tories for all of its decisions, whether it was tax rises, increased government borrowing, even releasing violent criminals early. Labour played the game of doom and gloom so intensely that it itself spooked the markets and led to a crisis of confidence. But it can no longer play this game. The economic inheritance for Labour was 0.7% growth in the first quarter of 2024 and 0.4% in the second quarter. But Labour, the self-proclaimed adults in the room, the purveyors of securonomics, the people who vowed never to play fast and loose with the country's finances, have delivered 0% growth for the first quarter in charge, with an actual decline in GDP per capita, which is even more important as that means every individual in the country is getting poorer. Indeed, early estimates suggest that in October, the first month in the fourth quarter of this year, the economy contracted, which means, if true, Labour has actually shrunk the economy since taking power. All of this stems from Labour's disastrous anti-growth, anti-business and indeed anti-working people budget. Here's what Chief Secretary of the Treasury, Red Rachel's number 2, had to say in response to today's news.
So look, this Labour government is going into 2025 with absolute resolve to work with investors, wealth creators and workers across the country to stimulate economic growth and improve living standards for workers across the country.
But if you want to stimulate economic growth, you can't make it more expensive to employ people, which is what Labour's done. You can't impose inheritance tax on businesses, as Labour's done. And you can't chase wealthy people out of the country by abolishing the non-dom regime, as Labour has done. And amidst all of this, the Prime Minister's decided to take a holiday. Fair enough, I think that's deserved, and politicians ought to have some holiday. So we wish the Reverend Starmer a very Merry Christmas, but he is unfortunately the man who crashed the economy. As ever, let me know your views via mailmog@gbnews.com. But I'm joined now by the head of lifestyle economics at the IEA, Christopher Snowdon. Christopher, thank you for joining me. I wonder if the decisions Labour has taken have made it worse, but that our economy needs fundamental reform. We need reform of the tax system. We need to get away from the green agenda. We need to change our basis of economic activity.
Yes, I think broadly speaking that's correct. I mean, we would all like to have lower taxes, but at the same time we have debt out of control, really, and rising, despite Rachel Reeves' claim to have, aiming to reduce this, get the deficit down. In actual fact, she's just changed the rules. She can borrow even more money, and she's been giving a lot of that money to public sector unions, and that is not the way to generate growth. What we need is deregulation, quite simply, and talk is cheap. It's very easy to say that you want growth. It's very easy to say that you hope there's going to be growth, but it doesn't matter how much resolve you have, rather. You need to do something about it. And what have we actually seen? since Labour came into power. We've seen a big spending, big borrowing budget. We've seen a lot of money going to doctors and train drivers. We haven't seen anything in the way of deregulation. We've heard some fine words when it comes to housing, but nothing actually being done. What we've actually seen are things like Martin's Law and the football regulator and the tobacco and vapes bill and any other number of petty regulations, the combined effect of which is to stifle growth.
And we're going to be getting coming up the packaging tax, which will make shopping even more expensive for people, which drains further money out of the economy. But it seems to me it's a change of approach that is needed, that actually the last Tory government and this Labour government seem to believe that just by making little tweaks here and little tweaks there, you can balance the books. We're actually in a doom loop, aren't we, of economic activity, with the government spending more and more and taking decisions that are just going to make things worse.
Yes, and a lot of the regulation that's been introduced both under Labour and under the previous government didn't even pretend it was going to generate economic growth. That was a sort of second-order matter. It was about the environment or about health or all these other issues, many of which are important in their own right, but there's never any sort of acceptance of trade-offs in these things. And all of these bits of legislation, you take them individually, they don't seem that big a deal. They don't seem that much of a disincentive to set up a business or employ people. But you add them all together, we're talking decades of stifling regulation here from successive governments. And we do need a government, I do hope Labour will do this, that's going to turn around and say, look, this really is a problem now. We look to America or the emerging markets which are doing so well. We need to be more like them. And I'm afraid that means that sometimes politicians are going to have to sacrifice their pet projects and focus with a laser-like vision on growth.
And that some chickens are coming home to roost, that the environmental regulations that people set to take place long into the future, well, that now future is arriving. So the car industry is about to be destroyed in this country. The steel industry has been destroyed. And unless we take a completely different view to the green agenda that both the Conservatives and Labour have taken, we're going to carry on putting a huge downward turn on our manufacturing industry.
Yeah, and again, it comes down to trade-offs. We've been sold this lie that we can have cheaper energy and more jobs and that everything's going to be wonderful. The reality is that net zero, anything approaching net zero, is actually a cost. Now, you can argue it's a cost worth paying, but you can't have both. You can have net zero, absolutely. You can do anything if you borrow enough money and tax people enough, but you can't have growth. You can have all these public health objectives, but you can't have growth. You can have protectionism for people's housing stock and all sorts of other things. You can have all these things, but you won't get growth.
Right. Thank you, Christopher, very much indeed, and I wish you a very happy Christmas as well. Thank you for joining me. Well, with me now is a friend of the programme, journalist and broadcaster, Matthew Stadlen. Matthew, thank you as always for coming in. I think the problem is bigger than the decisions that this Labour government has made, but this Labour government has made it worse, particularly with the budget that has turned the economy down.
There are a few things just to push back on before the bigger picture, if I may. You were talking about GDP per capita going down and saying that means that every single person in the country has got poorer. Not true, it's an average.
It's an average, it's an average, but every person in the country has on average got poorer.
You also did talk, didn't you, about releasing prisoners early. We know that your former colleague, former Justice Secretary Alex Chalk, himself drew up plans to release prisoners early.
Yes, but
he didn't act on them because he was worried about the political fallout.
He didn't do it.
But the reason they did have to do that is because the prisons under you lot were absolutely
there's always choice over how you do that.
Well,
there are 10,000 foreign prisoners.
You could ask people to live in total squalor if you want. We can talk about foreign prisoners.
There are 10,000 prisoners you could deport.
This government would like to deport as many foreign prisoners as it can, I'm sure. But on the economy, let's talk about the economy. We had various things there about net zero, and there's a cost. We had deregulation. Well, we know that the government is keen to deregulate where it feels that it safely can. Starmer gave a set-piece speech, didn't he?
OK. But let's just...
Precisely on that point.
All right, but let's
you can't deregulate to the point where another Grenfell Tower happens.
No,
there is a role for regulation.
But there's £1 billion of cost to be hit on the city for diversity and inclusion regulations. There's £70 per household on the tax on packaging.
This is the government, Jacob, that is determined to defeat the blockers. They keep saying it, don't they? We will judge them on what they do.
There's a ridiculous football regulator. The most successful industry in the country is about to have a regulator.
Jacob, you know that this is absolutely front and centre. Whether they succeed or not is another question. We can't judge them on that yet, but they want to defeat the NIMBYs, don't they? And that will, of course, provoke all sorts of outrage, perhaps amongst your constituents, but they are trying to get through the obstacles to building, which is literal growth. On the wider issue of growth, I was quite depressed about this. Can I just be candid?
Yes.
I was a little depressed about this, as you might be, if you are hoping that, as I hope we all do, that this government was going to nail growth. Because if we nail growth, let's remind everyone, I'm sure everyone knows already, you have a bigger pie and you have more more slices to hand out for things like the NHS and so forth. I was a bit depressed about it because no one wants to see stagnation. No one wants to see negative growth, which we haven't yet got. Well, we've got it in that first month, potentially in October.
And we've got in GDP per capita.
But we have to wait and see. The reason I'm not as depressed as I was when I woke up this morning is because you have to think these things through. And having thought these things through and listened to some of the experts, it's clear that the effects of the budget itself have not yet been properly felt. We don't know what happened in November yet. We don't know, of course, what's happened in December. We, for goodness sake, don't know what's going to happen next year. Are the signs positive at the moment? No, they're not. Is what the Confederation of British Industry said concerning? Of course it is. Was I convinced by raising taxes on small businesses, the engines, one might argue, of growth? No. But why did they do it? Because you guys destroyed our public services. And if you don't have public services, you can't have medium or long-term growth.
I wouldn't be too gloomy about what the CBI says, because it is always wrong. I mean, it is usually a very good counter indicator.
I'm not going to argue with you on that point tonight.
And I'm not going to quote the CBI when it's on my side, very unusually, because
But do you take anything that I say? This is still early days.
It is still early days.
The budget doesn't come into effect, or much of it, until the spring.
But what you're saying, I really like about deregulation of planning. I wanted us to do that. But it comes with lots of other regulations. So there's going to be changes to compulsory purchase to take that away from a market system to make it more of a government-led one. That tends to make people less willing to give up their land rather than more willing, because the pricing mechanism actually works.
But you've got to give it a go, don't you?
And the
it might not be perfect. It might not work.
I think
let's hope that it does.
permissions and pricing work more effectively. You've then got the employment regulations that are being proposed, which is threatening holiday work, because in tourist industry areas, you have people who work in the summer but don't work in the winter. If you're telling them they've got to have hours through the winter as well, people just can't afford to employ them. So there are real problems in the whole approach to employment. And that's before I get on to the national insurance surcharge, which is a terrible mistake.
Take workers' rights and pay and the minimum wage and where you set that. These are really tricky issues, because you don't want the unintended consequence of raising the minimum wage to lead to unemployment. Of course you don't. So it's managing an economy, and let me just quickly make the point, as you guys know, is an incredibly intricate, difficult thing to do. Rachel Reeves, let me promise you, I've met her once, I've interviewed her once, but let me promise you, anyone watching will know she is desperate for growth. Why is she desperate for growth? Because they came to power saying that we would be, or that the aim was to be the fastest growing in terms of growth per capita in the G7. They've now seemed to have downgraded that to a hope or an ambition, or whatever it is. My point is, of course she wants growth. Has she gone about it in the right way? We have to wait and see, because so much of our politics are short-term. And if you don't have an NHS that works, if you have ill people, you cannot have a flourishing workforce.
Spending more taxpayers' money on giving people pay rises, and the train drivers is the worst of these, without productivity increases. You know,
what you say without productivity,
there was no deal on productivity.
The railways, to some extent, ground to a halt. If you don't have I can't believe we're rehashing this, because this is a relatively small part of it.
It is, but it's symbolic, because it shows the attitude.
You can't have an economy if you don't have railways that work.
You can, actually. They're a very small part of people's transport. Most transport is by car.
OK, but tell that to people who are coming to funerals and to weddings and to parties, but also spending money in our city centres.
If you talk to taxi drivers, nowadays, London works when the train drivers are on strike. It doesn't work when the tube drivers are on strike.
That's anecdotal.
Yeah, but taxi drivers see what's happening day to day.
To my mind, and tell me if you disagree with me, to my mind, the most important issue here is, are we going to get sustainable growth? And I understand why she put that money in to public services, partly to fix the hole. I don't think it was £22 billion, but there was definitely a hole. Partly because the Conservatives seriously and chronically underinvested, particularly, but one might say egregiously, when interest rates were low. You have to fix the foundations. Now, has she accidentally put obstacles in the path of growth that would harm us and harm Labour's ambitions? We have to wait and see. But
well,
look, could you agree with me that we hope she succeeds?
We always want the economy to succeed. We can carry on discussing this after Christmas. I hope you have a lovely Christmas.
I hope you have a wonderful Christmas.
I wish your mother-in-law, Pauline, a very happy Christmas.
Who is a big fan,
as well.
as is my wife.
And I'm hoping
they watch the programme.
She will bring you round to the right side over Christmas. Anyway, thank you, Matthew. In a moment, we'll be looking at how Labour's disastrous handling of the economy could affect you, and if there's any hope of some good news for 2025.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The BBC has been branded jaw-achingly stupid, not by me, by the way, over its decision to cast black and ethnic minority actors in the historical drama of Wolf Hall. Now, is this a forward-thinking idea or nonsense? Are we rewriting history? Henry, I mean, the Tudors were real-life people. They were pretty much white.
Well, some of these shows depart so much from historical context anyway that maybe it doesn't make any difference. But I think just generally we've got a problem in this country with portraying history in its correct sense. You can't change history. And I think it's about the motivation. If the motivation is to sort of to some sort of, you know, to make a political point, then I think it's wrong.
What I find kind of tedious about people finding this instant jaw-droppingly stupid, Jesus was portrayed by somebody who's half Slovak and half Irish. Moses was portrayed in the Exodus by an Englishman. So, you know, same with Anne Boleyn, you know, was portrayed by Natalie Portman, who is Jewish. So if this is the one thing that's getting people angry, then there's something deeper within that rage, because I think Hollywood's been doing that, where people...
When you say something deeper, do you think there is a hidden racism and people are complaining about this?
Well, I think for some, maybe, yes. I can't speak for everybody because this news dropped today. I don't know why they are thinking that it's egregious, but there absolutely must be some underlying racism if this is the only one that you're upset about.
GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and we were talking about the economy, and the mail mogs have come steaming in. Graham says any simpleton would think that you can raise taxes to record levels and achieve significant growth. And Alan says, never met so many disillusioned people feeling worse off. Starmer should work from home wherever he goes. Holidays are a dream to most people in 2025. Well, let's continue our assessment of Labour's destruction of the economy. Labour has faced censure for its planned new grocery tax next autumn that could add £70 to consumers' grocery bills each year. The packaging levy will punish retailers that manufacture or import more than 10 tonnes of plastic. When you compound this with Labour's workers' rights overhaul that could cost millions of part-time jobs, the economic outlook is looking pretty bleak. Well, I'm joined now by my most civilised panel, the former Attorney General, Michael Ellis, and the former Labour MP, Lloyd Russell Moyle. Lloyd, let me come to you. The government talks about deregulating, and then it adds more regulation. It talks about getting growth, but we all know that supply-side reforms lead to growth, not extra costly regulations.
Well, the regulations that you've mentioned there, if we break them down, the plastic levy, or whatever you're wishing to call it, is, and I know you'll not like this, but an EU-wide initiative to
we left
change
the EU.
To change the way that packaging is paid for. And it was an initiative led by the UK and the Conservative government when we were in the EU, and the Conservative government, when we left, wanted to continue it.
But suspended it.
They delayed it.
You delayed it,
They delayed it. Delayed it to get the implementation right. But there was never a scrapping of the scheme.
They delayed it because it was idiotic, and they didn't want to admit that they were doing U-turn.
I don't think it is idiotic. And what it will see is it will mean that at the moment, some supermarkets, Morrison's is very good at this, keep their deli counters going, and you order the amount of food you want, sliced off the ham, etc. That item will then be costed cheaper than the item that is in some plastic piece of ham that isn't the bits that you want.
Plastic wrapping reduces waste enormously. The ability to wrap things in a way that they don't go off has made the whole business of supermarkets so much more efficient. It's charming to have things at delicatessen counters, but this is, even by my standards, old-fashioned. This is going back to the 1950s.
Well, in some areas, the move to plastic has not necessarily been a positive thing. It has increased food waste, which we have seen grow hugely in this country.
How does it increase food waste? Because if it's packed in plastic, it survives longer, it lasts longer, longer sell-by dates.
No, because people then... Well, it lasts longer on the shelf.
Yes.
But it doesn't last longer at home. Once you've opened the packet, it still perishes as quick as it would have. And people have to buy super-sized packets because that's what's available on the shelf, and not maybe two slices, for example.
Even of toothpaste, you can get small packets. But let me bring Michael in.
Well, I have to say, I mean, this is one of the many reasons why the economy is flatlining. It's the typical mantra of the left, which is tax, 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 and that is not going to help the economy. And this fixation... Of course, I mean, the Laffer curve, you have to bring this up because you look at, for example, Margaret Thatcher. When she came into office in 1979, the highest rate of tax was above 90%. When the Tories left office, when Blair came in 97, it was 40%. And yet there was more income coming into the Treasury when the highest rate of tax was at 40% than when it had been at 90%. Why? Because the economy thrives when the tax is lower. Why it is that the left cannot learn this repeated lesson over the last 100 years is really not going to work, because you may save in one way, but you cost in another way. So if you'll save a few pennies on wrapping, you will lose a greater sum of money when it comes to the contamination of the food that has not been protected, and that will go bad quicker. But this pressure that is being put on shops to do this is then going to have to cost more money for those businesses. And who's going to pay for that? It's going to be the customer. And therefore, you're putting prices up doing this, and it's the typical Labour mantra of tax, 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 and spend, spend, spend.
And the total bill we're talking here is maybe £70 a year. And what this will mean is, rather than the councils having to fund their recycling and bin collections through council tax, this will be able to now ensure that those are fully funded when you buy Lloyd, the cost of the product. And it means you know it's a bugbear of lots of people that they can't get their recycling picked up weekly or their bins weekly. This now will fund that. And I think a lot of people will actually say, for £70 to know that my bins will be picked up every single week and my recycling, they'll be quite pleased about it.
You know perfectly well that hypothecated taxes never remain hypothecated. The road fund tax was hypothecated when it was introduced. That didn't last long. Any tax makes money gets... I think
got rid of the hypothecation there. But some hypothecations do work, and this will work because it is not a tax to the Treasury. It is a fund that goes somewhere else.
The cost of bin collections is put up by the equally ridiculous landfill tax. So we've got these environmental taxes which are just...
Very few councils now put rubbish in landfill.
They have to, because they're not recycling as much as they're told they've got to.
Jacob, if you tax too much...
Most of them incinerate.
Well, there's some incineration, but an awful lot
Almost all of London incinerates.
But it's all
we
about
incinerate down the
not outside London. There's a lot of landfill.
Regulation, tax. It just puts impossible pressures on people who have to make a living and who have to buy their weekly groceries. And this sort of thing actually has to be reflected. £70 is a lot of money to people who want to be able to buy groceries without the price constantly going up. The supermarkets don't want to have to put the price up, but if it's going to cost them more, someone is going to pay for it.
And if they don't use the packaging, it will cost less, and they won't have to put the price up at all.
But packaging allows people to buy more fresh products.
Packaging.
Anyway, we're going to move to more uplifting matters, because I wanted to tell you about the fact that the Holy Father, Pope Francis, will once again open the Holy Door tomorrow, signalling the start of a Jubilee year. More than 30 million pilgrims are expected to pour into Rome as a result, seeking a plenary indulgence. Now, to get an indulgence, you have to be in a state of grace, so confession and the receipt of the Blessed Sacrament. Indulgences reduce and remove the punishment deserved for sin, so lessen the time people have to spend in purgatory. Jubilee years were started by Pope Boniface VIII in 1300 as a centennial event, but then they became once every 20 years because of the generosity and beneficence of subsequent popes. Well, thank you to my panel. In a moment, does the official account of events in Magdeburg add up? Plus, is Labour on the cusp of rigging democracy in its favour?
Hi there, welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Increasingly gloomy during the next 24 hours, a lot of low cloud, drizzle and some hill fog too. But it's also going to be very mild, certainly as far as Christmas Eve and Christmas Day go. We've had this warm front moving in from the west through the day. That's brought the cloud, it's brought some outbreaks of rain, and those outbreaks of rain are continuing to work their way east across the UK. And with a lot of cloud overnight, as well as this mild wind direction, it's going to be a case of temperatures rising through the night and not falling, so 9 to 12 Celsius first thing Christmas Eve. It's going to be grey and misty outside first thing as well. A lot of hill fog in the west with some patchy drizzle and some more persistent rain affecting western Scotland in particular, along with a strengthening wind. 12, perhaps even 13 Celsius though during Christmas Eve morning. Remarkably mild for the time of year. If there is any brightness to be had, it'll be eastern Scotland, eastern England, perhaps parts of the Midlands of the south east, as well as eastern parts of Northern Ireland. But any brighter interludes will be short-lived. Most places will see extensive cloud cover. That cloud will be covering the hills and coasts in the west, so grey, misty conditions and some drizzle here and there. But by the afternoon, actually, much of the south will be dry, away from hills and coasts in the west. And actually, with highs of 12 or 13 Celsius and lighter winds in the south, it won't feel too unpleasant. But further north, the winds are going to strengthen. And it's going to be a windy start to Christmas Day across northwest Scotland in particular, with some wet weather around. Elsewhere across the country, most places on Christmas Day will be dry, albeit rather cloudy again, and once more, very mild. Temperatures gradually decrease during Boxing Day and into the weekend, but it stays mostly dry.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Jubilee and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Jubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date. Or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Well, we were talking about the economy and read Rachel. And John says, I think Rachel Reeves has been taking economic lessons from Diane Abbott. She hasn't been paying attention if she has. Dan Abbott knows a lot more about the economy, I think, than Rachel Reeves. And Neil, the thing is, for years, both the Tories and Labour have been high tax, high spend. It would be comical, if not tragic. A suspected terror attack shocked the Western world over the weekend when a car was rammed into a Christmas market in Magdeburg, killing 5 people and injuring 200. The suspect, Saudi-born Taleb Abdul Mohsen, was initially thought to have been an Islamist. However, his social media suggests he has left his Islamic faith, and he has been described by German Interior Minister Nancy Faeser as Islamophobic. But does this all add up? An extreme Islamophobe targeting a Christian Christmas market in a conservative part of the country. Well, I'm joined now by my panel, former Attorney General Michael Ellis and the former Labour MP Lloyd Russell-Moyle. Lloyd, it's very odd, isn't it, that this man who was born in Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabian, was known to the Saudi authorities, suddenly does this as an anti-Islam thing?
Well, let's see what comes out. I do wonder if it is he's anti a certain persuasion of Islam. So you look on his Facebook page and it might be condemning certain bits of Islam, but that's because, and we all know religions like to fight within themselves as much as they like to fight externally, kind of with other religions. So that could be a possibility. It could be a possibility that he is someone who is converted, and my feeling is that it's very difficult to pontificate on these things until we find out more information. And I do wonder, why do we need to know? I mean, I know that people have been saying, kind of cover up all this kind of stuff, but there is no longer a safety issue. It's not like the man is on the run. He's locked up. And when the court process happens, we will find out there. I do sometimes think the rolling news effect doesn't necessarily help come to clear deliberations.
But it's quite interesting because it seems to be helping AFD, even though he is said to have been a supporter of AFD. So the consequences are important.
Well, I think, first of all, there's a lot we don't know about this, and I think one should exercise extreme caution in these early stages of reports like this. What we do know...
This is too loyally. We want your view.
But what we do know, though, Jacob, is that this was a horrific attack with 5 people killed, and one of them, I think, was a child, and hundreds of people injured. A 9-year-old child.
Horrible attack.
Just before Christmas, the most horrific, appalling attack. I think one of the things, as a former AG, that really interests me is that there are reports that the Saudi authorities had warned the German authorities. And one mustn't be too overtly critical when one doesn't know the full facts, but I think there are questions to be asked there about what went wrong there. If that's true, if it's true that they had a warning of some sort or they had an alert, and did they act on it? And if not, why not? And how did that play out? And I think that's something that needs to be asked. But the whole situation is appalling and horrific for everyone involved.
Indeed, and that's a very important point to emphasise. There is some problem, though, with people coming from Saudi Arabia, isn't there? Because all the people involved in the 11th of September attacks, known in the American version as 9/11, were from Saudi Arabia.
Well, I think what's important is that the Saudi authorities are trying to help here, by all accounts, and are trying to issue warnings where they are aware of something going wrong.
Come.
And it's important not to generalise about what's happening here.
Yes, but we can generalise about the particular form of Islam that has propagated in Saudi Arabia, and we have pandered to, I'm afraid. Wahhabism is a particularly nasty and pernicious form of Islam that actually, rather than stamping out, because we've tried to make bedfellows with Saudi Arabia, we've allowed their influence in mosques up and down the country and around Europe, rather than actually decent, moderate Islam, which actually existed in Britain far before the Saudi influence started to come in the last 20 years. So I do think there is a problem with that particular
with Iran too. With Iran too. It isn't all in one quarter.
Yes, but some of those strands of Islam... But with Iran, we're already very alert to it. Kind of our authorities are very alert to it. I think we have a slight blind spot to some of that. And it's not all of Islam, but and you can say that with certain strands of other religions as well. But there are some that are particularly dangerous and pernicious.
I think that does feed into it, in my view, looking as if it is Islamist terrorism once again. That's the underlying point. In other news, returning to the home country, Labour's plans for the new year, the Commons leader and Lord President of the Council, Lucy Powell, has suggested the party's controversial decision to grant voting rights to 16-year-olds could come in the next parliamentary session. So could this be Labour's plan to gerrymander the voting system? Lloyd?
Yes.
No. No, well, first of all, no, because I think as your party, and I think you've commented on this before Jacob finds out, that very often when you change the mandate, it doesn't necessarily go the way you want. So any of my colleagues who are doing it because they think it will help them, I'm not sure it will do. And if you look at a lot of countries now, young men particularly
they're all going to vote
tend
for
to vote far more right-wing than they do vote left-wing.
Of course, but it's an attempt to gerrymander. Let's be honest
I think it's
here.
a moral issue. I think it's a moral issue, and my view has always been that voting rights should be one of the first things. We should be encouraging people to vote in the family and at school.
If it was a moral issue,
once you vote early, you vote continuously.
If it was a moral issue, then you're saying 99% of the democracies around the world are not being moral about it because they don't give the vote to 16 and 17-year-olds.
Well, other countries
the truth is, this is obviously an attempt by Labour. The only reason, rather like their hereditary peers, the only reason they got rid of the hereditary
peers... Rather like our doing voter ID. We thought it would stop Labour voters, and it turned out that it stopped elderly Tory voters.
Exactly.
It was a really stupid thing to do. I never liked it.
I think on this point, though, Jacob, the fact is Labour think that 16 and 17-year-olds will vote for them.
And they'll all, in fact, vote for Nigel.
That may very well happen, but Labour's MO on this is to try and get them to vote for them, and that's what they think they'll do.
As soon as they realise they'll vote for Nigel, they'll drop it. But I want to come to the fundamental point. You see, I've got no principled objection to voting at 16. I just think you should have an age at which you are an adult, and voting is part of that.
Yeah.
So I think you should vote at 16 if you're allowed to fight for your country at 16, if you're allowed to get married at 16, if you're allowed to have a cigarette at 16. If you're not allowed to have a cigarette, but you can choose the government of the country,
right. Well,
something's
you're
wrong
not allowed
with
to buy fireworks.
I don't agree that we should have one age that you go to bed and the magic adult fairy whispers in your ear and you wake up suddenly a mature adult. I don't think that's how development of human beings work. And I actually think that what you need is a staggering of ages. If you want to drive heavy goods vehicles, you have to be much older than being just
and you can drive a tractor at 13.
Exactly. So it's quite right that these things are staggered. And I think voting should be one of the early things.
But voting is saying you're a full member of society. It seems very odd not to allow you to be married, to establish a family.
Well, in Scotland
16.
you can marry at 16, and personally,
and we've only just changed it.
We have just only changed it.
How can it be logical to say that you cannot buy fireworks, you cannot buy cigarettes, you cannot buy alcohol, you cannot serve on the front lines in the armed forces, you cannot serve on a jury at 16 or 17. You can't do any of those things, but you can vote.
But there are lots of things you can't do at 18 and 19 as well.
Not many.
No, there are very few things left that you can't do at 18.
Not many beyond
very
that.
Few.
Yeah, but there are some, because we understand the staggering. And, we now, in terms of criminal responsibility, very often allow younger ages to be tried with adult
well, in this country, 10 years of age and older.
Exactly. So in the courts, it's OK.
It's obvious gerrymandering, Lloyd. Obvious.
I think we're about to have a carol, aren't we? that was the Vocal Zone Voice Choir Studio from South Derbyshire, and I always thought the words while shepherds watched the box by night, all tuned to BBC, the angel of the Lord came down and switched to GB News. Anyway, thank you to my panel. In a moment, has the woke mob found its latest victim just in time for Christmas?
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean all clear skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Hello, welcome to your latest winter sun forecast brought to you by the Met Office. We'll see an east-west split weather-wise across southern parts of Europe over the next few days. Mostly fine in the west, more unsettled further east. Could see a few showers on Christmas Eve across the Canaries, but for much of Iberia, it's set fair, plenty of sunshine around here. And then we run into more unsettled conditions across southeastern parts of Europe, some wind, some rain, even some hill snow in places. And that east-west split continues as we go through the Christmas period. Further unsettled weather to come in the east, generally fine the further west you are.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
A Jaguar has ditched its growling big cat logo as part of what can only be described as a woke rebrand. The badge that has been used for decades, look at it, beautiful, on the bonnets of luxury cars has been swapped for a curved geometric J badge. They've also released a brand new advert, look at it, for their rebrand, which prompted Elon Musk to ask if the company actually sold cars. I thought this was a wind-up. It's not, it's true. Joining me now to discuss this is the motoring journalist Amanda Stratton. Amanda, what on earth is going on at Jaguar? The car of James Bond, Batman, Arthur Daley has gone off the scale woke. Please make me make sense of it.
The E-Type is an absolutely iconic car, and it's important that people remember that, in fact, in its heyday, Jaguar was an incredibly prestigious brand, more so really than other British brands like Aston Martin, for example. You know, people in the industry are left sort of scratching their heads because you need to do something bold, you need to do something that catches people's attention, but you also need to stay true to who you are and what you are, and I'm not sure that this is it.
Amanda, that could be an advert for anything. It could be cat food. It could be Karl Lagerfeld. It could be literally anything apart from a Jag. Well, I mean, honestly, I mean, OK, we're talking about it. So we are talking about it, but we're not talking about it for the right reasons, are we?
And I think if I was going to be speculative here, I would like to think that this is actually all part of a cunning plan to get everybody talking about it. Yeah. So when they do launch the first new car that we're going to see, which, you know, people have been waiting, as I say, since 2001.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Well, we don't have trigger warnings here at GB News. The only snowflakes that are involved in the channel are on our introductory logos during the Christmas period. You may have noticed them. But it seems the bad kind of snowflakes don't take a break, even during Christmas. As it turns out, the professionally offended have found their latest victim, Charles Dickens. The Bromley Little Theatre in south-east London has sparked a row following its bizarre decision to put a trigger warning on its rendition of Charles Dickens' Nicholas Nickleby. Well, I'm very pleased now to be joined by Peter Whittle, the founder of the New Culture Forum. Hello, William. Thank you so much for coming in. Don't we need to protect people from being offended, and shouldn't I actually have a trigger warning hat on me generally so that people are warned?
Well, Jacob, I think the point is, of course not. I mean, with this particular one in Bromley, Nicholas Nickleby, I think they're warning people about Victorian slurs, you know, sort of in speech. So words such as queer or hussy. And, you know, this might offend people. Fact is, of course, that, you know, the word queer, I'm sure they are using in a very old-fashioned way, which was to mean ill or feeling strange or whatever. But, I mean, the broader point is really that whether it's Charles Dickens or whether it's Shakespeare or whatever it is, whether it's a play at the theatre, whether it is an exhibition in a gallery, this is increasing, and it's sort of like setting people up in a way. You know, they put these trigger warnings on, you know, basically to say, essentially, you could be upset by this. The fact is that the whole point of the arts is actually to, you know, in the traditional sense, provoke and maybe sort of make people think differently about something.
But do you think it's a problem really with education, that people haven't necessarily read very much Dickens, therefore they don't know that it will be using language that was common in the 19th century that is no longer used, that some of the attitudes will be attitudes that people commonly don't have, and therefore people, when they're buying a ticket, should know that they may be offended, and if they're easily offended, if they're snowflakes, they shouldn't buy a ticket?
Well, so what if they're offended? That's what I would say. I think you've got something there when you talk about people basically not knowing the stuff before. But the whole point really is I remember going to see the Greek tragedies when I was sort of like a teenager. I didn't really know what to expect. And I remember being kind of quite blown away by some of the things that happened, you know, in it. Same goes for Shakespeare. And indeed Nicholas Nickleby. But it's like we're being treated now like children. I mean, essentially, it's infantilizing, and that's what I object to more than anything. Also, it is making the arts neutered. I mean, you know, it's not a particularly left or right thing, actually, in the sense that I think Ian McKellen and Ray Fiennes have both talked about this and both want trigger warnings to be gotten rid of. Because they're increasing. I remember seeing one myself. I went to see a play called Backstairs Billy, which was about the Queen Mother and her favourite servant at the time, which was, you know, a nice light comedy drama. I remember going in, when I went to collect my tickets at the box office, there was a sign there in a frame saying, this play set in 1979, so some of the attitudes in it will reflect that time.
But aren't we in an unusual time in a sense that until the late 1960s, the Lord Chamberlain made sure that plays were all right. You then have Mary Whitehouse in the 1970s bringing up an accusation in the courts against the Romans in Britain, actually made it sell out every night. Yeah. And that until relatively recent in our history, there's been some control. There's now no control. So people just don't know what they might get. And maiden aunts may innocently be going in to see Nicholas Nickleby, and suddenly they will swoon and need the smelling salts. And shouldn't we not be assisting the sellers of smelling salts in this way?
No, I fundamentally disagree. People should be able to be shocked. Most people are capable of being shocked and handling it. I don't think there's a problem at all. This is not really brought about by the actors.
Who does do it? That's the other question.
Well, that's the point. It is, I would say, it is administrators.
Is it the Arts Council?
Well, it's more, I would have thought, on a local level, actually. It's people who run the theatres, people who run the galleries, you know, the kind of administrative people who are the most sort of woke.
And are they just utter snowflakes, completely wet, devoid of any backbone? Or are they just told bureaucratically that they have to do this, like diversity, etc. training?
I think probably a bit of both. There's also possibly a kind of commercial fear. They're sort of, you know, because we're so ruled by safety now and being risk averse that I think that they're rather worried that somehow somebody somewhere is going to sort of say, I had no idea that this play was, that, you know, Macbeth is full of murder and
the occult and all sorts of things, blood
and witches
out down
and everything.
spot.
And you sort of think, oh, for goodness sake, get on with it. But I think they're slightly worried, like a lot of the whole safety industry, in people kind of getting angry and maybe in some ways affecting their commercial.
If anyone is offended by the multitudinous seas in Carnadine, they have a very good command of English. Thank you very much to Peter. Up next, it's the great, the one and only Patrick Christys. Patrick, what is on your bill of fare this evening?
Yes, great show, Jacob. Loads on tonight. So I've got a human rights lawyer on who knows the Germany attacker. Now, he thinks that he might not be all he claims to be. Has he really rejected Islam? What are we going to do, Jacob, about the work-shy and the feckless? 52% of households now are on more benefits than they pay in tax. How do we solve that problem? I've got the woman on who gave Yvette Cooper a piece of her mind earlier when Yvette Cooper was handing out mince pies. That clip went viral, so we've got that woman on. That's going to be really great to see what she makes of things. And do you think that Keir Starmer deserves a holiday, Jacob?
I do think he deserves a holiday, but I shall definitely be listening to your programme as I go down to Somerset on the wireless. That's all coming up after the weather. I'll be back in the new year. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, and I wish you a very Merry Christmas, prosperous New Year, and as good weather as we have in Somerset.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Increasingly gloomy during the next 24 hours, a lot of low cloud, drizzle and some hill fog too. But it's also going to be very mild, certainly as far as Christmas Eve and Christmas Day go. We've had this warm front moving in from the west through the day. That's brought the cloud, it's brought some outbreaks of rain, and those outbreaks of rain are continuing to work their way east across the UK. And with a lot of cloud overnight, as well as this mild wind direction, it's going to be a case of temperatures rising through the night and not falling, so 9 to 12 Celsius first thing Christmas Eve. It's going to be grey and misty outside first thing as well. A lot of hill fog in the west with some patchy drizzle and some more persistent rain affecting western Scotland in particular, along with a strengthening wind. 12, perhaps even 13 Celsius, though, during Christmas Eve morning. Remarkably mild for the time of year. If there is any brightness to be had, it'll be eastern Scotland, eastern England, perhaps parts of the Midlands and the South East, as well as eastern parts of Northern Ireland. But any brighter intrudes will be short-lived. Most places will see extensive cloud cover. That cloud will be covering the hills and coasts in the west, so grey, misty conditions and some drizzle here and there. But by the afternoon, actually, much of the south will be dry, away from hills and coasts in the west. And actually, with highs of 12 or 13 Celsius and lighter winds in the south, it won't feel too unpleasant. But further north, the winds are going to strengthen. And it's going to be a windy start to Christmas Day across northwest Scotland in particular, with some wet weather around. Elsewhere across the country, most places on Christmas Day will be dry, albeit rather cloudy again, and once more, very mild. Temperatures gradually decrease during Boxing Day and into the weekend, but it stays mostly dry.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Imagine getting a call to tell you that you've won £50,000 in tax-free cash, our biggest cash prize of the year.
Oh my God.
That's a big surprise.
Oh my God. This is amazing.
I'm in shock.
I'd say don't hesitate, do it.
For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, joining us now is Feng Shui expert Karina Sophia, who's going to share some of the best ways to ensure that our homes are still feeling calm as well as beautifully decorated this Christmas time.
One of the Feng Shui myths is that Feng Shui is all about moving furniture, and it isn't at all. Oh. Well, there is a little bit of that. It is about the flow of energy, but it starts outside, so there's lots of different forms of Feng Shui. So what we're going to talk about today is one form called Flying Stars Feng Shui, and there's another one that's classical, and form Feng Shui starts outside. If a 5-year-old would walk past your house and be happy, then the energy will.
I love that.
So if a 5-year-old would like to see more, would like to come in and would touch anything and not get hurt, then it's a good thing and the energy is feeling good and wants to come in as well.
What about the light colours? Does that matter? Does that come into play?
Yes, there are different colours. Depending on the direction, the compass direction of your home, there are good colours that support the energy inside the home. So if your home is facing north, for instance, then it would be sitting south, and the inherent energy of the south is fire. So you want to have red or green, which is wood that fuels the fire, and that supports the inside of the home. Now, I just painted my door red a couple of days ago, and then I got this opportunity, so don't underestimate it. You want to decorate your tree with whatever you want to manifest. Whatever it is that you want to bring into your life. So this speaks for itself. It says joy.
Oh.
And it has a little bell
I
on
like
it.
that idea. I can get on board with this. So you decorate your tree with things you'd like to see in your life.
Yes.
Okay.
So we're going to put some joy.
That would be nice.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's 9 p.m. I'm Patrick Christie's. Tonight. Did the suspected Saudi Arabian Christmas market attacker shout Allahu Akbar as he was arrested? Regardless of his motives, mass immigration and dodgy asylum claims are putting all of our lives at risk.
I'm from Saudi Arabia. I'm an activist. I created a website to help people seeking asylum.
I mean, the BBC naturally did a bit of good PR for him previously, but I speak to a human rights lawyer who knows the alleged attacker and thinks he might be lying about rejecting Islam. Also tonight.
Meet the jobless Phillips family, who have lived off state benefits for the last 20 years.
Oh, grief. You shouldn't have to pay for the feckless and the lazy. 52% of households claim more in benefits than they pay in tax. And
Not getting next time about good luck to you. That is so two-faced. Give him a mince pie out.
It's a nice tradition.
No. Give him a blanket because they're freezing to death.
yes, the woman who went viral for giving Yvette Cooper a piece of her mind is on my show at 10:20, so don't miss that. It's a TV exclusive. Plus, the bloke who was hit in the head and then the nut during the summer disorder has today been sentenced to 2.5 years in prison. Do you think that's a bit too long? And
the youth thing is really interesting. I mean, something very big is happening. Gen Z are completely different to the millennials.
well, look at that on your screen right there. So reform